Welcome to the Let's Chew podcast presented by Gulf Food, the largest annual F&B sourcing event in the world. I'm your host, Juwaria Hirsi, bringing you compelling stories and insights to a wide range of topics in the food and drinks industry, from farming, behind the scenes, to the culinary world, and to foods we simply love to chew on. In this podcast series, we speak to people, brands, and businesses across the food and drinks spectrum to find out more about why they do what they do and how, in their own way, they're championing change and shifting the future of food and drink. Trust me, there's so much more, so listen to the Let's Chew podcast on our website, gulffood.com, and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates in food. Welcome back to the Let's Chew podcast. As always, I'm your host, Juwaria Hirsi, and happy 2024. Today, brace yourself to an electrifying episode as we dive into the incredible journey of Mokhtar Alkhanshali, the founder and CEO of Port of Mokha. Beyond his noteworthy role as a community organizer in San Francisco, Mokhtar is a coffee innovator with roots tracing back over 5 centuries to the birthplace of the world's first coffee in Yemen. Featured in the acclaimed book, The Monk of Mokha, by best-selling author Dave Eggers, Mokhtar's journey is one of empowerment, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the vision where the industry uplifts rather than represses. So join us as we uncover the inspiration behind reviving Yemeni coffee and the unique mission driving this impact venture. Welcome to the Let's Chew podcast, Mokhtar. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So before I start, I'd like to know more about your journey and why you do what you do. So if you can just share your journey, the story behind Port of Mokha, and your mission to revive Yemeni coffee.
It's a very big question. I don't know how many hours you have.
You can be here all day.
But I think at the root of my story is someone who was trying to find a path in life. I think especially as young people, it's hard sometimes to figure out where do we belong in this world? What is our purpose? And these big questions kind of weighed down on me a lot. And growing up as a third culture kid in America, it was quite hard to try to figure out where I fit in. You know, I love my family's heritage, our food, our music, our traditions, but I also love hip hop and I love American fast food and movies. And it's sometimes difficult to figure out where you belong. And I was always interested in history. And I think history, there's so many things we can learn about ourselves. Hopefully not the bad parts to repeat, but some of our heritage, some of our amazing achievements. And for me, I was really inspired by what we contributed to the world as Muslims in the realms of science and art and medicine. And when I learned about coffee, it was something I was very proud of, in particular because it was something that was unique to Yemen.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about your family's heritage that you brought into Port of Mokha and like your inspiration behind your mission and your story of Port Mokha.
Well, in the early years, my family was not, I don't want to say supportive, but it was difficult for them to understand it because they had risked their lives to come to America to find the American dream, and they did not think that their son, the eldest
Go
son,
back.
would decide not to go to law school, and
Okay.
which as immigrant kids, your parents they give you a few different options. You're a doctor, you're a lawyer, or an engineer.
True.
One of my friends, he's from India, and he told his dad he wanted to be an actor. And his dad looked at him and said, "Beta, it's pronounced doctor." So in the beginning, I just it was more of an hobby. And at some point, I just felt that it was something I really wanted to be a part of. I fell in love with coffee as a drink. I
Okay.
think it's an amazing beverage that really inspires people to be creative, and I love the taste. Before coffee, my background was in nonprofit work, in particular immigration, mostly low income immigrants, refugees applying for asylum. And I really believed early on I wanted to do something around social impact for my career.
Okay.
Didn't know what it would be exactly, but I thought being a lawyer, I could champion people's rights. And when I learned about specialty coffee, this idea of transparency and traceability around this coffee and how people are treated and how they're what they're paid for when they grow it, I thought that was a great place for a different type of impact that I thought was more sustainable than just NGO work. I didn't know anything about coffee, and so I just kind of decided that I'm gonna see where this goes.
Okay. So just take us to the beginning of when do you remember like the specific day or like the time where you've like, you know what, I'm going to start something, go back to Yemen. Like give us the whole journey.
October 1st at 12:02 p.m. 2013.
Okay.
It's
Very
exactly the
okay.
date. A friend of mine texted me, uh, and sometimes in life, a small thing like a text message could have a butterfly effect and
Yeah.
take you on a whole huge journey. One of my favorite quotes in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf tells Frodo, "Be careful when you open your door, where your feet will be swept off to." So
Okay.
that was my moment, my Frodo moment. And she told me basically that there was a statue of a weird Arab Yemeni man in front of my job that this man was drinking coffee.
Okay.
At that point, I was at this weird crossroads in my life. I was trying to finish school. I was working a lot of odd jobs. This one in particular, I was a doorman. Um,
Okay.
the title they gave us was lobby ambassador.
More fancy.
I guess they thought it would make us feel better,
Yeah.
and honestly, it kind
Sounds
of
better.
did.
Yeah, it sounds better.
And I was the ambassador. I was this. It was a really interesting building where some of the richest people in San Francisco lived, and I was there reading my books and trying to figure out my path in life. And I wasn't depressed, but I was very close, and I was looking for any kind of sign. And I think if we're aware, we can see subtle signs. I'm sometimes a bit esoteric in that regards. I think that there's always signs around us, and if we carefully, we can find things that help us be inspired to follow certain paths. And but for those who are listening, there's a really good book by Rick Rubin, "The Creative Way." I believe that's the title. I have a lot of books I'll be putting out here for people to read that talks a lot about finding inspiration and how I think as kids we have this childlike curiosity
Yes.
that gives us a very powerful antenna. But as we grow up, the world and society tells us we start seeing the world in prisms of utility and of survival, and we lose this ability. But again, another time, another topic. But yeah, so I just saw the statue, and it started me down this journey of just learning more about the history of coffee, these amazing Sufi masters, and the poetry, the literature. It's a whole world that I knew nothing about. Coffee, when we see coffee now, it's really this kind of secularized um, commodity that's been stripped of its soul and its beauty, and it's now a tool for capitalism to fuel people to work harder.
True.
But in the early days, it wasn't so. It was very different.
Tell us how so. Like, can you give us a little bit of
I
a
mean,
history of the coffee?
it's an amazing journey. There's thieves and poets and sheikhs and all kind of wonderful things. There's a few good books. One I would recommend called "The Merchant Houses of Mocha" by Dr. Nancy Awesome person. This book, when I first read it, 2013, I believe, it was like the never-ending story. This where at some point I'm reading this book and at some point I get swept up into the book. Um, but yeah, there's always a difference of opinion where coffee begins
Okay.
between Ethiopia and Yemen,
Yes.
and depending on which side of the Red Sea you live, you'll have a different answer for that. I am probably the only Yemeni who thinks coffee began in Ethiopia.
Okay.
Sorry to my Yemeni brothers and sisters listening. As a plant, that's where I think it began.
From Ethiopia.
From Ethiopia, South Sudan, the World Coffee Research Program, it's an incredible institution. They state that it began somewhere in a region called the Eastern Afro-Monte region, which is South Sudan, Ethiopia, and parts of Yemen. So it could have been, but they didn't drink it there. It was grown wildly. The early consumption was they would take the cherries and they would uh, run it around with some animal fat and eat it before long journeys or even battles, kind of like an early keto diet.
Oh, okay.
Um, and there's different stories of how coffee leaves Yemen, Ethiopia. This part of the history, it's really not in. You don't really find it. And I feel it's been marginalized, and we should focus on this a lot because it's really the most important part of coffee's history, this region. Because when you read history books nowadays, it just talks about something about a goat, a camel, a goat, a herder named Kaldi and his funky goats, and then Mocha in Yemen, this weird city, and then somehow coffee gets invented in Italy, in France, and we forget about this wonderful time period,
Yeah.
which coffee. So if you allow me a little bit to stay here,
Of course.
it it grows there, and we had a Yemen's first academic symposium last year in the capital Sana'a with my nonprofit, the Mocha Institute, in collaboration with incredible on the ground organizations like the Unity of Coffee and the Yemeni Coffee Export Association and the Union of Coffee Farmers, and we had 18 white papers submitted from incredible academics across fields like genetics and irrigation. And one of my favorite speakers was a professor from the University of Hudaydah named Dr. Abdul Wadud Makhshar. And I was so excited to be a moderator for that presentation where he said, and this was in Yemen, that coffee as a plant was from Ethiopia.
Okay.
And the man who in many ways discovered coffee was a sheikh named Sheikh Ali ibn Umar al-Shadhili. He is from Yemen. He at some point goes to Egypt, to Cairo. He has a dream to go to Harar, Ethiopia.
Okay.
Goes to Harar, and at that time there was a battle between the local Muslim emir and the tribal groups around the city. So he sees this Yemeni man who had an aura of nobility and righteousness on his face, and he asks him to make dua for them to win. They win the battle, and so the leader of the city begs Sheikh Ali to stay, and he ends up marrying his own sister.
Okay.
So the story goes that he sees them eating this weird plant, and he's like, what is this? What are you guys eating?" They said this is helps us become more alert and gives us a lot of energy. And he says, "لماذا تأكلونه ني?" Like, why do you eat it raw? And so he decided to figure out a way to drink it. And he roasted the beans, takes them from Ethiopia with his new Ethiopian wife, goes to Yemen. And the first place in Yemen that grows coffee is a region called Ib province, where my family's from. And he plants it there, and it spreads across Yemen. Eventually makes its way to the Hijaz, Saudi Arabia, and Mecca. There was a lot of issues there because when coffee made its contact with the Muslim world, some Muslim scholars actually banned coffee. The word for coffee, qahwa,
Yeah.
is actually an Arabic word that means it's a type of a wine.
Oh.
Al-khamr alladhi yuthiru nashwa, the wine that raises you to a state of ecstasy.
Okay.
And so a lot of Muslim scholars, unfortunately, when there's something new, they
They
immediately
ban it.
say it's haram and we'll ask questions later, which should not be the case. And so eventually it's banned in Mecca for a little bit, gets to Cairo. The in Cairo it gets also the Al Azhar University bans it. It's actually interesting. I was at Al Azhar last year with some of my friends from Cairo Coffee Collective, incredible roastery out of Cairo, and we were there with my friend Omar Nazmi, and we met with, I believe his name, he's the Naib Reis al-Da'wa al-Maktuba, al-Fatwa al-Maktuba. And we get there, and he's telling us that he's writing a book. He says, بينما كنت أحضر لكتاب عن تاريخ الأزهر تطرقت إلى موضوع التعصب في المذاهب. He said, in short, I was writing a book on the history of Al Azhar University, and I got to a subject around madhabism, and there was the title of the chapter was um, the event of coffee.
Okay.
And so it was this situation where he says we go ولقد وقع لنا بمكة المشرفة قرب 900 الهجرة. It happened to us on the year 900 of the Hijrah calendar أننا حضرنا وليمة عرس, that we attended a wedding. فأتي إلينا بشراب المسمى بالقهوة يشربه الناس على العادة. And we were given this drink called coffee that people drank. فقال بعض أكابر مفتي مكة: القهوة حرام مسكرة نجسة أشر من الخمر. That coffee is haram, forbidden. It is intoxicant. It is unclean and is worse than alcohol.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
this huge debate between the scholar about this and this other person. And at the end of this debate, he realized it's not an intoxicant. It actually does the opposite. تزيد من الوعي وتقرب إلى الله. It gives you more consciousness and alertness, and it gets you closer to Allah. So the first culture of coffee was a very spiritual culture where people got together after long days of working, and they drank this drink, and they sang songs to worship a God. Um, there's a lot of poetry. There's one of my favorites, another amazing scholar, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al Jaziri Al Hanbali. He writes a book because, again, there was a lot of fitna around this issue. Is coffee halal or haram? And he actually, I think, writes the definitive defense for coffee.
Okay.
It's actually the oldest manuscript in existence. It's in the National Library in Paris. I was able to see it a couple of years ago, and it's called عمدة الصفوة في حل القهوة, the pillars of purification in the defense of coffee, or the solution for coffee. And it's about 7 chapters about jurisprudence in Islam, how we derive our jurisprudence, where coffee came from, its origins, why it's good for you. But at the end of this book, he has these wonderful poems. He says, يا قهوة تذهب هم الفتى أنت لطلب العلم نعم المرادي شراب أهل الله فيه الشفاء لطلب الحكمة بين العباد نطبخها قشرا فتأتي لنا بنكهة المسك ولون المداد. And that was a really great poem, which basically says in English, it's a poem that talks about if you want to seek knowledge, you should drink this drink. If you want to seek wisdom between people, drink this drink. And the other poem, which it's really one that probably impacted me the most, was by Sheikh Ali ibn Umar himself, Ash-Shadhili, in the 1400s, 1450s. He writes this, I think it's the first real work around coffee, and he says, قهوة البني يا أهل الغرام ساعدتني على طرد المنام وعانتني بعون الله على طاعة الله والناس نيامي لا تلوموني على شرب لها إنها شراب سادات كرامي. He says, O coffee, O story of love, you helped me repel away my sleep. You helped me stay awake and worship my Lord while people fell asleep. Don't blame me for my intense love for coffee, for it is the drink of the righteous people.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that it is. And so I can talk about this for long, but in
I
short,
know.
coffee leaves Yemen, gets to Istanbul, becomes an amazing art form there. At that time, it was such an important part of society that women, if a wife didn't get her daily quota of coffee, under the Hanafi code then, she could divorce her husband.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Priorities, right? It makes its way eventually to Europe. One is through the Ottoman siege of Vienna, 1683. The other was the Pope Clement VIII. He actually banned coffee. He called an evil Mohammedan drink. The devil's brew, he would call it. And the
Wow.
people really wanted him to try it, and they begged him. And finally, he tried it. And this is one of my favorite stories. After his first few sips, he loved coffee so much that he actually baptized the beans. And said it would be a sin to have this only for the infidels, meaning
Wow.
us.
Yeah.
So the other thing about coffee is when it enters Europe, something magical happens. For the first time, there's a drink that really brings people together and builds their creativity and fuels them. And in my opinion, there's a huge correlation of the entry of coffee into Europe and the Enlightenment period, Industrial Revolution, because there are these places you had people coming together to talk about politics, philosophy, art. There's a book by Michael Pollan, one of my favorite food writers and academics. It's called "This Is a Mind on Plants." It's 3 different drugs. Each chapter is one drug.
Okay.
One is caffeine, and he says he quotes a German historian named Wolfgang Schiffelbusch, which I thought was an amazing last name. He says a culture that would forbade alcohol consumption and invent coffee would of course be more advanced in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. And so coffee, in my mind, really changed the world and for the better. And so I think it's something that we should all learn about and be proud of. And it's one of my first motivations for trying to continue this legacy.
That's beautiful. So you've told us a little bit about the history of coffee, where it's originated, but I want to understand why you got into coffee, especially coffee production, and what were the challenges, especially making coffee or exporting coffee, sourcing your coffee from Yemen, which is quote unquote war torn country. So can you just tell us about your experience and some of the challenges that you've faced?
Yeah, I think early on, growing up again as this third culture kid, especially after 9/11, we as a community were we were attacked on the media and school, wherever it was. We became this new boogeyman. So I thought coffee was a way for me to build bridge for people to learn about our culture in a very positive way. I think food and beverage can be catalysts for these kind of bridges. I didn't, of course, do nothing about farming or roasting or export import laws, and so I was just very naive and just kind of had this naive arrogance. And we have a very old art in America called "fake it until you make it." I think that's universal.
Yeah.
And so I just decided I could learn this thing, reinvent myself. I mean, obviously now learn all like the difficulties and the hardships, the pain, the embarrassment. I probably wouldn't have done this, to be honest. But I did not know that then. So that was my intention in the beginning. And I thought coffee could be a way to help impact people if done correctly. So I had to learn how to become a coffee person. We actually have an exam to become a certified taster,
Okay.
coffee kind of sommelier,
Okay.
called the Q Grader exam, and it's 22 exams. One of them you have to learn 36 different smells for coffee. You have to learn six different organic acids found in it. You're talking to someone who failed organic chemistry, by the way. You have to learn about the 16 visual defects, all these different things, roast profiles. There's a lot of chemistry involved. And it's our language to learn how to identify and to evaluate. And it's very powerful when a farmer knows what their coffee is worth. So I did that, and eventually I went to Yemen. This was not the best time to do any business in Yemen. Unfortunately,
I'm
I
sure.
just again had this kind of I don't know what to call it. Naive arrogance is probably the best term. And it was also the most exciting time of my life. I went back in 2014. I went to 32 different regions all across Yemen.
Oh,
Places that my you just I read about in books, so I had these reports.
yeah.
My family were, of course, quite concerned what I was doing in these mountains and why I was like, I just kind of they thought I was going through a phase.
But did you go back there to discover more about coffee, or was it just like going back home?
No, I was well, in the beginning, I didn't really tell anyone. I thought my parents thought I was going back to get married, which
Okay.
did not happen.
Yeah.
But I wanted to learn more. I didn't think about a business. I thought maybe it'd be a nonprofit.
Okay.
I realized early on that the nonprofit model, it created this form of dependency that I didn't think was positive for farmers or for people.
Mm.
And so I just kind of let me just see where this takes me kind of situation. It kind of grew from like one summer trip to like I was there for like 4 months, 6 months, and going around these valleys and mountains and meeting these people. It was such an amazing adventure. Some things were not so great. Got a lot of different food poisonings, malaria, tapeworms.
Yeah.
Just a lot of. I lost around 20 pounds in this time period.
Wow.
The country was very unstable. It was going through this turmoil that kept getting worse and worse. But there was all these great moments I had in this time, and I took back samples from 21 different regions.
Okay.
At that time, no one had really done that before. And it's important to keep the coffee samples separate because every village, every variety cultivar has its unique flavor profile. Every farmer is different. And if you mix the regions together, you'd lose some of these gems, which was an unfortunate case. So I also saw a very broken system. Farmers in particular, they get probably 10 cents to a dollar for their work around the world, not just Yemen. And so it was really unfortunate. And my goal was to try to shorten that distance between farmers and consumers. So that was the first trip, and I brought back samples. Most of them were not great because the way they was processed wasn't correct. You have to pay somebody more money for them to do better quality work. And
Okay.
so after that, I found 2 regions that were really phenomenal, like, not just phenomenal, they were like some of the best coffees my consultants told me they've had ever tasted. And so that gave me a lot of hope to go back and start working there. I brought back more samples, and they were horrible. And I realized that the way it was processed, the way it was harvested, the way it was sorted was
Mm,
inconsistent, so I had to
go
create this
there.
infrastructure and do everything from scratch, and, that was kind of the first phase.
So tell us what sets Yemeni coffee apart
The
from
old
the
varieties, like, we have some of the oldest varieties in the world. We're the oldest country to cultivate coffee, and to develop it. We have really interesting elevation. The higher coffee is grown, the slower it matures, and it produces more acids and sugars. And the other thing was we have not that much water, which becomes a very positive thing because the trees, they are under lots of stress, and that makes them produce more unique flavors.
okay.
So these are just a few things that make the coffees very unique. These kind of situations for the coffee.
Okay. I want to talk about what's like the current situation around the world, the climate issue, all these geopolitical crises. So how is that impacting your business?
It impacts every business, and I'm sure you because you get to talk to different people in different fields, and we cannot turn a blind eye to the political realities of where our things come from.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate whether it's in Yemen or Tigray, Ethiopia or Ukraine or Medellin, Colombia, Mindanao, Philippines. All these places that produce things are unstable. Much of the instability is not because of its own people, but because of the conditions they are in.
Mm,
And we always hear the terms countries from these underdeveloped countries.
mm,
And I always I don't want to say get mad, but it disappoints me when people see the global south that way.
yeah.
We're not underdeveloped. We're overexploited.
True.
The cacao from West Africa, the oil from the Middle East, the rubber from Indonesia, the coffee from Ethiopia, the tin from this country, the cobalt from Congo, and so forth. All these countries produce everything that is being consumed, but the reality is that the material success doesn't go into the hands of the producers, except these multinational corporations that are from the Western countries that have a deep history in colonization and exploitation.
Mm,
So even though their armies aren't there anymore, they're still their factories are still there. And in the world of coffee, for example, 200% the profit happens when you roast coffee. And the people who can roast and have the facilities and resources to roast and distribute are all in Western countries. And it's quite sad. And so I'm seeing an amazing moment now where people from, I call them wounded cultures, people who in the global south who have a history of colonization. A lot of young people are now reclaiming their heritage in different things, in their spices, and their leather goods, and their chocolates, and their coffee. And it's amazing because we can tell our stories better. When I hear somebody's story of their mother's or grandmother's recipe of making a particular dish, and their intimate, knowledge and personal connection to that, it's quite different than somebody who's trying to figure out a marketing angle for this. And so
yeah.
I was really inspired to try to do that too, to see how I could, in my own way, decolonize this supply chain in this way. But not in just this academic theory, but actually on the ground, which is quite different. It's not easy living in these countries because of their conditions.
Yeah.
So it's a longer answer for this, but I think that um, it's quite difficult. But we also have a lot of amazing opportunities because of our connection. We have this authenticity. We know how something is made, and we can tell our stories in a different way. And no matter how difficult the situation is, we it's I mean sometimes it's difficult always being resilient,
Yeah.
figuring out how to be creative. but it's really our strength and our ancestral powers, and I can go on about this. But yeah, Yemen in particular, it was really difficult. I went through a lot of not so great moments, and it made it that much more meaningful when my coffee was served in these roasters around the world.
Oh, what about the like supply chain issues? Is it getting worse right now because of the crisis that are
You know,
happening, or do you feel
mhm.
like it's manageable, or what advice would you give to people who are in similar situations as
I
you?
think it's interesting. I think that that's why it's important to be really deeply connected into what you do,
Okay.
because you will be thrown these difficult problems, these roadblocks. Some of them are quite literal. But if you're connected to a bigger purpose that's bigger than yourself, you will be able to overcome that and find a solution. And I don't mean to just kind of give you this, like, pie in the sky, just pray
Yeah.
but I do believe in that, actually, because it's hard to just look at the world through logic. I think one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein, he said, "Logic will get you from point A to point B, but imagination will take you anywhere." So for me, I shouldn't be here talking to you. I should probably not be alive, to be honest, but I am here. I'm doing okay. And so in our current situation, it's been difficult for 8 years. The current war right now in Palestine has shed some light on the situation, but people were, when they started the U.S. government started to bomb Yemen last week, people asked me, how are you? How's your family? And I said, this has been our life for 8 years. Um, and people are used to it. It's very sad that people in these countries, especially young children, like, normalize death in this way. Shouldn't be that way, but it's the
Shouldn't.
reality. And so I don't make that the main story.
Yeah.
I don't like to solicit people's pity or sympathy. I don't like to post pictures of poor farmers who are just struggling with flies in their eyes and
Yeah.
hands. I think that we want people's solidarity more than anything, and the way to do that is to see yourself in them. That's why I try to shed stories of farmers with their lives outside of coffee. They are, some of them are break dancers. I have one farmer who does that. Another farmer is a chess master.
Oh,
Another farmer collects vinyls. Like, everyone has their own story, their own unique thing, and when a consumer sees themselves in that, they can actually begin to create that bridge. So that's I hope this answers your question a little bit.
yeah. And I want to hear more of your personal stories about your experience with coffee in Yemen that you would like maybe people to know more of, because our listeners are from around the world, and we do have a lot of the Western countries also listening in. But I just want you to just share maybe another story about the culture of Yemen and coffee and the people that people might not know.
Oh, being here in Dubai is wonderful, because uh, coffee is such a huge part of Arab culture.
Sure.
It's a شيء أساسي بالنسبة لكل بيت. It's like a major foundation for every home. Even in the old Arab Bedouin tent, the first room was the coffee room. There's always a picture of a coffee bean fire with a della
Hmm.
on it. And so it's a really huge part of our culture, and about a lot around hospitality, about generosity, about building community. It's who we are. And so Yemen is a one branch of this wonderful Arab family, and it's very similar what we see here that happens in Yemen. So most of the most important conversations happen around cups of coffee. We have a wonderful poems around coffee. The coffee harvest is a very beautiful moment for people. We love to sing these kind of songs. There's one song by a very famous poet, Mokhtar Al-Iryani. He passed away a couple of years ago. Wrote this poem where he says, بن اليمن يا درر يا كنزي فوق الشجر من يزرعك ما افتقر ولا ابتلى بالهواني. A Yemeni coffee, or pearls on the trees. Whoever grows you will never taste of hunger or humiliation. And that kind of shows the idea of, like, what coffee is in society for
Yeah.
Yemen. And also, even with the divisions happen in Yemen, الcoffee يعني القهوة هي من الأشياء التي ما زالت في ذاكرة الإنسان اليمني. It's one of the few things that it's still in the national consciousness of Yemenis. And if you look closely, and I love telling Yemenis this because even they don't know this. Even like our eagle that we have, the coat of arms that's on our
Mm.
passport and IDs. If you look at the صد الصقر, if you look at the chest of the eagle, you'll see a coffee branch with cherries.
Oh,
So and it's not, there is no like northern coffee or southern coffee. It's it's a national thing. So coffee and soccer, those kind of are what's keeping the country together.
yeah.
But it's a wonderful thing for us. And the other thing is, it's hard for me to describe you how beautiful and magnificent uh, Yemen is. But when you see images, and if you listen, just go on Google and look up Yemen, or look up my family's hometown, Ibb. It looks like the Shire from The Hobbit. It's just green and lush and beautiful mountains, and they live a beautifully uninterrupted way of life where they take care of the land and the land takes care of them. These beautiful terraces on the mountaintops with these villages, they don't look real. They're on the tops of mountains. Some of them literally look above the clouds, particularly in areas like
Mm.
Haraz. And the people are so generous. Like when I first started to go, I remember going to these villages and they would have people from different households line up, and I would ask them, "What are they doing? Why are they in line?" And my friend would tell me, "They're doing a lottery to see who gets to host you, because everybody wants to
Oh,
bring you over." And
so
it's like,
beautiful.
I mean, they'll go out of their way. They'll take loans to buy lamb or to be able to be a generous host. And if you tried to give them money, it would be a huge disrespect. And I'll tell you, when someone gives you something from their heart, it tastes better. So I was just blown away by the generosity of people, and it's something that's very keen to this part of the world. But yeah, I was really, it's one of the things that I hope, once the war ends, people can start coming back and seeing experiencing these beautiful, wonderful moments.
Inshallah. So I want to just get a better idea of Port Mocha and where you're located. Where do you sell your coffees?
Mhm.
So if you can just give us a kind of like a recap of or a summary of all your operations.
Sure. So I started my own farm, Alkhanshali Estate, and I have a collection of a few farmers that I work with,
Mhm.
and they're in partner estates. And so that brand, we work with a few roasters. We've sold some of our best lots through for Port of Mocha to actually some really great local roasters here, like Espresso Lab in Dubai. Ibrahim Malohi, shout out to him, one of the great coffee pioneers of the UAE. My friend Nasser from Cartel Roasters up in Abu Dhabi, an amazing roaster and cafe. There's wonderful people like Archers over here. And one thing interesting about the UAE is that you have a lot of women-owned cafes, which is really wonderful in seeing that here. To the Moon, Zainab, she's phenomenal, and a few others. A lot of our coffee is sold in Asia, so Taiwan, Korea, Japan, a lot in the US through those brands. And then Port of Mocha, I have a roastery operation in the US. We sell coffee directly to consumers online,
Okay.
and I have a new brand that I'm excited to launch this year. I don't mean to leave you guys on a cliffhanger, but it's something I'm really excited about. I've been trying to work on this for almost 4 years now,
Oh wow.
and it's just really a continuation of what the coffee was like in the past, and how it was a very inspiring and beautiful experience. So follow me on, and you can learn more about that down the road.
That's exciting.
Um, but it was quite a long journey to become an entrepreneur, and people who read my book, it's pretty much a dummy's guide to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a ride to just, it's still surreal to see that people read that and know more about my life.
Sure. So as a coffee expert, what do you think are the global coffee trends that are kind of going around at the moment?
Well, it's wonderful seeing coffee begin to take a revival here in the Middle East, in particular in the GCC.
Mm.
I remember early on, you can only find Arabic coffee.
Mm.
I'm going to be a judge next week at the World Arabic Coffee Competition in Abu Dhabi. But besides that, Turkish blends, and it was not that much specialty coffee. And now this wonderful explosion around the GCC, which I feel is beautiful because you start to see um, beautiful cafes and many of these roasters pushing the envelope in terms of design and creativity. And I like to say that we're bringing the Arab back into Arabica.
Yeah.
And so in terms of trends. I think that we're starting to see a lot more experimental processes happen on the farm level. Things like anaerobic process, Masonic carburation, slow dry naturals. People here are more aware of these kind of process techniques and are asking for them.
Mm.
Um, I think that's pretty unique. There's also a new wave of people drinking Robusta coffee, which had a bad rap for a long time. I love Robusta coffee when it's done correctly. It could be phenomenal. So I'm starting to see that happen. And then something else is a lot more sustainability efforts. Many roasters, particularly in the US, they have yearly sustainable reports that they publish, and and it's one of my challenges to cafes here in the region that they should audit themselves from their finances, how they're paying. The more transparent you are, the actually better it is for you. Customers are starting to they're starting to ask these questions. You know, how much are you paying your farmer versus what they're normally being paid? How are you reducing your carbon footprint, your waste in cafes and your packaging, and all that's really important for the environment. So I really hope that cafes, anyone here who has a cafe or roastery, or you're even a farmer, there's all that you can. I audit myself on every level I work with, farm level to roastery,
Yeah.
and I think those are the pretty much the biggest trends in that regards.
Fantastic. So, what is your future vision for Port of Mocha, and how can our listeners support your mission and the Yemeni coffee community as a whole?
Well, just buy Yemen coffee. It doesn't have to be Port of Mocha. If you There's amazing exporters out there. Just and also in general, when you buy coffee, because people ask me a lot, how do I know if it's the right coffee?
Yeah.
Look at the bag, pick it up, and look at the back of it. If it tells you the elevation, the varietal, the process, the name of the farmer or the cooperative, you're going the right way. If it
Okay.
has some weird random name or blend, and you ask the barista where is this coffee from, and they can't really tell you, that's not really a great sign. So that's, in our word, a big red flag.
Okay.
So just because a lot of times we think that we can't change the world. There's so many negative stories on the news every day, and we can get depressed with it. I think that we need to look at things differently. It's if we do small things every day, small positive things. If millions of people, for example, buy better coffee that's ethical, that will have a huge impact on farmers around the world. And so that's my challenge to those listening to do that. For me, just if you buy Yemen coffee, if you see it, please do buy Yemen coffee and support anywhere you find it. And and if you are interested in taking a career towards in coffee, it's a great, amazing journey. There's so many different parts of it: e-commerce, wholesale, roasting, equipment. I mean, really, you can do a lot. You don't need to have a cafe even. But that's my in general,
Advice.
my advice. If I don't give a lot of advice, but that's if I was, that would be my advice.
Okay. What is your favorite blend of coffee?
I blends are also really interesting. They're great because you can mix a few different things. So when you say blend, the oldest blend is the Mocha Java blend, which was a coffee from Yemen, from Port of Mokha, and an Indonesian coffee from Java. Java coffee tends to have like a lot of huge body, and Yemen has its fruit notes. In terms of favorite coffees, I mean, of course, Yemen is my favorite, but outside of Yemen, I do love Ethiopian coffee. I love the fruit notes. In coffee, you tend to have two kind of camps: people who love acidity and people who hate acidity.
Yeah.
So acidic coffees will have notes of like pineapple or like strawberries or these kind of like or even floral notes like jasmine.
Mm,
The other is more of the brown sugar flavors, we call it,
yeah.
like nuts, almonds, chocolates, flan, vanilla. And most people are used to drinking darker roast coffee. And so I would challenge you guys to try to drink medium roast first and see how you think about that before going to light roast. But again, I don't really care much about the roast you buy where it comes from. Farmers really don't really care what you do with our coffee as long as you buy our coffee. And so I would hope people start buying more ethical coffee and stay away from the large corporations that do this do so much harm to farmers and the environment.
So no instant coffees.
Well, actually, there is some good instant coffee.
Okay.
Well, there's something called a porver pouch I've seen where people can like make their own kind of pour overs. Yeah, and they sell a
Oh
lot of them
yeah.
here. A few cafes like Nightjar and Espresso Lab has them. Instant coffee, most of it is really horrible, to be honest. And I don't want to name names, but there are some good instant coffees. I think one, for example, Blue Bottle just launched this really interesting instant coffee program. Again, it really goes back to the transparency and traceability. If it tells you where the coffee's from, who grew it, where they grew it, how they grew it, it really, most of those coffees aren't going to be instant. They're probably going to be whole bean. Maybe some of them are going to be pour over pouches, but yeah, just buy coffee where you know who the people who or that grew it.
Okay. So this is just the last one, and it's kind of a fun, light-hearted question. If you could invite 3 fictional characters to share a cup of coffee with you, who would they be and why?
Never asked that question before. It's okay. It's fictional.
It could be.
I mean, first of all, Harry Potter for sure. Harry Potter was. I loved reading that book. Those books growing up. And I remember I was in a masjid one time, and I said, whoever I mentioned Harry Potter, and some of the older uncles were kind of looking at me, it's haram, and I said, wave your wands, and then there's all the young people wave the wands. And I said, it's haram. They start to laugh. But so Harry Potter is one. Number 2, if I had to be a fictional character, it's interesting. What would be my fictional character besides Harry Potter?
You can mix it up. Maybe people.
People's easier, but fictional character.
You can mix it up.
If it was real, okay, Malcolm X for sure. One of my favorite quotes, but I hate it, is he says, the only thing this is before he became to Hajj and before he, saw people as equal.
Yeah.
Because the early Nation of Islam was really a reaction to white supremacy, and it was very anti, integration, and blacks should be separated from whites. But he said, the only thing I like integrated is my coffee. So Malcolm X for sure, he had a huge impact on me. His another great book is the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, a wonderful book. And a third person to have coffee with would probably be Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Iraq. He's the founder of algebra, trigonometry, algorithms. Really, they would call it Khwarizmiyat in Arabic because of after him. And I just thought he was just like, what kind of person would think about that?
Yeah.
How would he? Because nowadays we have science, we have AI and these kind of things, but what he did was the building blocks for all of this. And so I thought, shout out to the Iraqis out there, it'd be amazing just to sit with him and just kind of understand how this person thought. And imagine if he had coffee, because he didn't have coffee. He probably would have came up with a lot more than just algorithms.
So that would be an interesting cup of coffee with those 3.
Yeah, wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah,
amazing?
that would be. I
would
want to be there.
Mathematics, and then social justice. Can do a whole revolution there. But thank you for that question.
No worries. I like to just put a little fun one at the end. But thank you so much for joining us at the Let's Chew podcast. Mokhtar, is really, really lovely getting to know you and your amazing, amazing story.
The pleasure was absolutely all mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Let's Chew podcast. Please share your thoughts and leave us a review for this episode. Stay tuned for more exciting stories from the world of F&B in the upcoming episodes Brewing for 2024. And until then, goodbye for now.